Good morning, everyone. This is Lowman02 with you today for another two-match series between myself and Michelle Wong in our 16 for each player deck gauntlet that we're currently running. It's an expo for 100 Card Singleton. What you're looking at right now is the first deck that I will run in the two-match series today. It is a Jeskai Planeswalker control deck. The top sound at Karn that you can kind of see on the right-hand side of the screen. It generally just grinds out card advantage through recurring +1 or minus abilities of planeswalkers. It's essentially just a control deck with a high volume of planeswalkers as opposed to like creatures or combo kill, stuff like that. It's just really a value deck. What you'll be on is green white Enchantress. I don't have that deck built in here, but essentially you can make a pretty assumption that has a lot of creature tutors that gets after cards like Vidruvian Enchantress, Argothian Enchantress, Enchantress's Presence, Eidolon of Blossoms, the Mesa Enchantress. So really just grinds out card advantage and eventually wins through, something like an Opalescence combo or whatever the thing is that makes angels, makes 4/4 flying angels every time you put an enchantment into play. Can't remember the name of it, but cards like that. I think it's a good deck. I don't think it's a favorite matchup for her because her deck, both decks are relatively slow. Her deck is probably better against a very aggro start than mine is. But I think when it gets to card advantage, which for a deck like this with Planeswalkers is really virtual card advantage, because I think you have to consider plus abilities or minus abilities of Planeswalkers to essentially be cards in and of themselves, because they kind of are. They have effects like a card would have that you'd have to pay mana for after you've already invested in the Planeswalker. This deck I think tends to grind out more advantage than a deck like hers does. I think you kind of see that comes to pass in the game we play, and plus it's tough for white green unless it's built to do so to deal with that many planeswalkers, and I think her deck's tuned more for creatures. The second match we'll play is Blue Moon, which I won't pull that deck up because if you've seen my competitive matches plus deck tech involving Blue Moon, I think that kind of gives you an idea what that deck's up to. And we're playing Red Deck Wins, which I do not think is a match that Izzet or Blue Moon is favored to win, but we managed to get kind of lucky. So let's jump into the matches. All right. As you can see, we kind of managed to get lucky today. We swept both rounds. But I think the second one could have been a lot worse for us. So you see Taplin coming to play from her. We play Plateau out first, expecting to play Sulfur Falls the following turn. We have a very slow hand, but I think it's keepable. It's defensible keep against her deck because my expectation is she's going to try to grind down card advantage over time, but not really rush us. So we've seen our Argothian Enchantress come off Green Sun Zenith. We get our own deck down, filter through some of our lands, try to get some early disruption or some like Wrath effects. We've seen Eidolon of Blossoms. So at this point, we find our Trinket Mage. We end up locking into our Engineered Explosives, which is what we plan on getting with the Trinket Mage. But we play on the Snapcaster first, and then end up path to exiling the Eidolon of Blossoms, or correction, Flame Slashing the Eidolon of Blossoms, because we know she's going to be drawing cards off it anyways, and we really don't care about the other two drop. We care about the Argothian Enchantress, but not the Wall of Omens. Play out the Engineered Explosives, blow up everything, path our own Snapcaster, which gives us days, and the ability to cast Elspeth next turn. And we kind of know the game's over, so she plays a 4/4, cool. We end up dazing, I believe, a Wall of Roots. Here, replay Island, cast our Elspeth, and then make the 1/1s. We draw, we keep the Izzet Charm, we figure, hey, we can steal something with Dak. We see a hexproof gal in Sigarda, Host of Herons. We end up, we're just kind of playing for lulls at this point. We take the Obstinate Baloth and then just Wrath all the big creatures away with the Elspeth. And at 2 cards, and us on 2 cards, and 3 planeswalkers in play, she gives it up. And I think that's probably proper. I mean, we kind of had this one in the bag. We go to game 2. And I believe we end up winning with Elspeth again. Yeah, again, another slow hand, but I have Wrath of God and I have Daze. So I play out my Prairie Stream first, which gives me Daze. Play out Marsh Flats. I believe we end up finding Hallowed Fountain with it. She is on a very slow hand, so when I see 2 planes come out, I'm kind of happy because her deck is fast, can be fast when it has green mana through cards like Green Sun Zenith or just the ramp, the land ramp, like Utopia Sprawl, stuff like that. But when I see, a Stirring Wild when it comes into play tap land, 2 planes, like, I know I've got time. I play out the True Name Nemesis, even though I have the Wrath in hand. My thinking is I can get her to extend a little further on the board if she thinks that I don't have Wrath. And typically, if you're going to play a True Name Nemesis, you're not going to do it if you intend on wrathing. I don't think True Name Nemesis is great in this matchup. It's just a slow clock. I think I can win just as fast, or more, I don't know if it's as fast, but I can win just as assuredly or more assuredly with cards like Elspeth Sun's Champion. So we end up we do a tap dance there. We attack in, and then we wrath over the top of our creatures. Put 3 more tokens into play. She's drawing. I believe we have a Primeval Titan cast here, which we end up hard casting Days on. I think she has to do this, but I mean, we have any litany of counter magic on 2 blue mana, which I think you have to assume we have blue mana if we have a polluted delta in play. We do. Don't draw much for the turn. We do have the Wormcoil Engine. I think we end up playing it out here. But really, this is an Elspeth game. Both of them were, honestly, because Elspeth, the 6-mana Elspeth, I think it's Sun's Champion, is such a huge threat. We get pacified, Qatari something, I don't know. But at this point, unless she can deal with 18 power and attackers, like the game is likely over, and as you can see, it was. So not a great matchup. I think she's unfavored pretty highly in that one. The next one, I think I'm unfavored in, but I'll kind of show you like some theories I have on red deck wins and kind of how some of them play out. So the first hand we toss back, it doesn't have any early interaction, doesn't have colored mana if I'm mistaken. I think it had a Desolate Lighthouse and a Wasteland. This hand right here, on the other hand, is pretty good. So, we need to draw red, and we know it. But we have a means of cycling through if we need to with our Fire Ice. We also have Thing in the Ice, which I think is a good card versus this deck because, it fogs a creature for a turn, and or multiple turns, and generally forces the red deck wins player to spend burn on it to get rid of it. So it's kind of like a Spellskite in some ways. Not at all points in the game. Spellskite is better in the later parts of the game when the opponent has run out of gas and they're just trying to top deck burn and kill you. This card I think is better in the early game where it can block out creatures and then eventually flip into a threat and have a lot of upside. As we play on our island, we want to have a basic out. We get very lucky and grab a mountain off the top. We play that out as well because we don't want to get wastelanded. We see a Blood Knight now. Let me go into a quick diatribe about this card. So I think protection is one of the more powerful effects on creatures, and Blood Knight is, no one would ever say Blood Knight is not an efficient creature. I think it's great. Like when you randomly get matched up against like white or a very heavily white deck, it'll be good. But I think more often than not, these kind of cards fall short in red deck wins. So as you watch Michelle's deck play out, I think she runs a lot of creature. I think it's a very creature-heavy build. The red deck wins, and you obviously need recurring sources of damage. I think red deck wins needs to be as low to the ground as possible and have as much flexibility in when it has the effect it wants to have. So all red deck wins wants to do is get you to 0 life. All of its spells, effects, lands, if possible, should do that. I'm not saying Blood Knight can't hit me, but at the same time, I think the ideal mix when you're playing red deck wins is about 33% recurring sources of damage. So not, 33 sources of recurring, I'm sorry, 33% creatures. So specific recurring source of damage. 33% of other sources of damage. Some of that may be recurring, like Ankh of Mishra, Sulfuric Vortex, stuff like that. Some of it may not. Some of it should just be burned. And then 33% land. I think that's about the ideal mix, and you can play with it a bit on, like fetch lands, like paring down land counts, based upon use of fetch lands to thin decks. But in a lot of ways, like red deck wins, I think, although it gets trumped up as being one of the best decks in the format, I don't really think it is. I think it's very, very strong. But I think once you understand how the deck works, there's a lot of easy ways to hate it out. I mean, and I'm not talking like warmth and like sphere of, circle of protection red or like sphere of law. Yeah, of course, those cards just beat this deck. What I'm talking about is once you understand how the deck truly works or what it needs to have work, I think there's a lot of ways you can play around that kind of thing or build around it. Like, so you see a card like Thing in the Ice, Is It Charm, Fire and Ice. These cards are all great early interaction against any aggressive strategy. And if you look at my decks, like even my control builds, like tend to be built on based on a curve, because my expectation is that, well, I may not need to play on a curve. I need to be able to impact, or I may not be playing threats on curve. I need to be able to impact threats on a curve. I think this gives you a lot of reach against decks like Red Deck Wins. Um, and also I think her deck is very heavily creature based, which I'm happy to see because this deck can deal with threats that don't hit me the turn they come into play, and also do not have the flexibility to be cast whenever the opponent wants to. So I think the reason you go for that 33, 33, 33 mix is because, you want to be able to force decisions out of the opponent where they can make mistakes. As opposed to Blood Knight, let's say she cast, Incinerate at my face. Now, I could have Is It Charmed that. Would I probably have? No, probably not, because I'm not gonna cast a counter magic on a 2 mana 3 damage spell that she's not getting back. But she could have done that and forced me to make a decision between using my Is It Charm on that or using the 2 damage off of it to kill a recurring threat on the following turn, because I could only do one or the other. So that's why I think you want that even mix, because you want your hands to have a mix of both, so that you can force decisions out of the opponent. Which anytime you can force a decision out of an opponent in this game, I think is good. They may make the right decision every time, but some of the time they're not going to, and they're going to screw it up. And I think that's a mark of a mature player too, is thinking through those kind of plays, because there is a lot of decisions. There's a lot of decisions that go on in that case. Um, you know, for instance, I think some newer players, when they play a counter magic or a deck with control elements to it, will tend just to counter anything they can counter. I think everyone's seen that. I think for the most part, there's a pretty mature crowd in the 100 Card Singleton community. But I think you want to, in this case, to get back to the original point, always force decisions out of opponents. And I think when you run a heavy creature-based build of Red Deck Wins, the decisions become pretty easy. Do I Wrath of God now? Do I counter a threat on their turn? Well, they're not going to burn me, at the end of my turn, or their mana's already tapped, etc. So, Thing in the Ice here, great card. It'll really pull its weight here. We see a strike in with the Blood Knight. I end up burning it out because I know she's not going to cast like a threat like Ball Lightning that I want to burn out, or whatever. See Young Pyromancer come down. I'm fine with that. I end up burning it out on my turn because I don't want her to get value off of it on her turn, which she can do in response with more mana. We see a Stoke the Flames. We got very lucky in a draw of Mana Leak. We counter this to get the thing a little bit lower. I believe we top deck Force of Will and we leave it open. We figure, at this point we're probably going to win actually, and we weren't really expecting it. So we flip the Awoken Horror, get rid of a very powerful card, Chandra Pyromancer, which is a very rare means of red deck card advantage. We take a hit from Ball Lightning, but hey, what are you gonna do? I think once the Awoken Horror is flipped, you can't just sit back on it. You gotta attack at that point. See a Fire Drink Satyr. We know she got the block with Magus, so we're happy to see Desolate Lighthouse. It's not a bad draw. It's not the best ever either. But it allows us to filter through some of these lands we're hitting at this point. We get a Factor Fiction. I believe keep a counter spell in Jace pile and play on our island so that counter spells up. End up winning the first game. So we're very fortunate to have won the first game in this match. As we get to game 2, post board, because I think it is worth looking at the board, we end up taking out all the moon effects. So back to basics, the Magus of the Moon and the Blood Moon. Put in the Flash Flood, Hydra Blast, and Blue Elemental Blast package. We took out Gush, Ancestral Visions, and Vidalcan Shackles as well. And those were replaced by Sun Droplet, Dragon's Claw, and Flash Freeze from the board. So very heavy sideboard plan against this deck, because I don't think it's a matchup we're favored in. And some of our slower, clunkier stuff against this deck, we just want to get it out of there. We see a Zergo Bell Striker. So to go over the keep right quick, we know we have a pretty decent hand here. So we know we have Flame Slash, Forked Bolt. We have a Counterspell in Deprive. We have a slower one in Exclude for later on. Cyclonic Rift, it's fine. I don't think we're going to get to 6. I'm not thinking in my head we're going to get to 6, so it's just like an extra turn to draw. We hit Impulse off the top. So right now, really, what we're looking for is more land to get this hand going. And we know it's going to be a little bit slower because, she plays on a threat like Zergo, and we know we can't make red mana turn 1. So the Cascade Bluffs is a little bit, not the best. It's not ideal, but, we're fine with it. So turn 2, we're able to get rid of the Zergo. I believe we used a Forked Bolt on it. And we're really hoping to draw land at this point. So we see another Gorehouse Chainwalker, another aggressive little creature. We Flame Slash that, leave up the Impulse, and really we're just hunting for more land. And we end up finding it. We get another island. And we draw another mountain. So at this point, we're pretty comfortable on lands. We see her cast nothing, which is fine by us. We'll pass the turn back and forth as long as she wants. Now we get a good draw on Young Pyromancer, which makes our counter magic a lot more alive. So we have Exclude and Deprive up at this point. We see a Firebolt. We just go ahead and cast the Deprive. We don't really care about the mana getting flipped back to our hand anymore. And I kind of want to keep that. Now, I'd like to pause just for a second. So let's talk Mizzium Mortars. Mizzium Mortars. So I think this is more of a mid-range or a control card. I don't think this is a Red Deck Wins card. I think if you wanted this effect in Red Deck Wins, you probably want to go with Flame Slash, which you've seen us cast, because it's just more efficient. But I don't think you want that. I think you're very rarely going to get to 6 mana where you can cast it with Overload, and it'll be just phenomenal. And if you are, you want to have already won by that point. I think by the time you're on 6 mana and your opponent's on 6 mana, they're casting stuff like Wormcoil Engines, which you're just not going to beat realistically. So I think some of it comes down to card choice. You see cards like Zergo Bellstriker, Gorehouse Chainwalker, and I think Gorehouse is a little questionable, but Zergo's good. So is Firebolt. But I think you look at some of these spells, and I was kind of talking about the other day in the video series I did, is Michelle is definitely a control player, and I think you kind of see that bleed over into some of her card selection for a deck like Red Deck Wins. I think Red Deck Wins is actually one of the pure forms of Magic, but it's also there's not as much thought that goes into the build. Well, there is and there isn't. It's an efficiency build. It's like the world's perfect robot. Red is very redundant, but you need to select cards in a way that allow that redundancy to be a thing. It's like building an assembly line to put the opponent's life total to 0. When you have cards like Mizzium Mortars that only hit creatures, are not flexible, and do not hit the face, while they are good cards, I don't think they're per se good in the Red Deck Wins deck. And as it turns out, I don't think she could have won this matchup anyways, or this match anyways, because we end up getting our Batterskull the following turn, and that tends to end games regardless of what you're playing in Red Deck Wins, unless you have instant artifact hate that you can just get it and it's done with. But it's just kind of food for thought. I don't think Mizzium Mortars is good. I think before you play Mizzium Mortars, you probably play a card like Flame Slash. I just don't think it's good enough for that deck because it doesn't do specifically what that deck is looking to do. So we end up countering the Firebolt. Maybe an inefficient use of our mana, but the way I think of it is it's going to put a 1/1 down, and I think eventually the 1 will become relevant, and actually it does. I just want to get a threat down at this point, because I have a Flame Tongue Kapu that's just a brick in my hand without anything else on the board. I guess worst case, I could Flame Tongue Kapu my own 1/1 after it attacks and have a 4/2, but a 4/2 is not likely to survive long and gets burned. But then again, if she's burning out my creatures, I'm generally pretty fine with that. We see a Flame Tongue of her own. We exclude this. Draw into, I believe, another land, and then hit our Batterskull. Correction, we hit a Repeal. So you'll see an interesting card here. A lot of folks will talk this card up, so I've got to pause. A lot of folks talk Coercive Portal up. They'll say, oh, this card goes in every deck, yada, yada, yada. I think they're dead wrong. The card's fine. It's not a bad card, and it definitely belongs in some decks. Where a card like this shines is in a archetype or a series of colors that cannot achieve card advantage. And I think it's best suited in a mid-range strategy. I don't think it belongs in Red Deck Wins. I fervently believe that Coercive Portal is actually a bad card in that deck. Red Deck Wins is not a deck that wants to pass 2, 3, 4 turns to draw extra cards. It's a tempo deck, and it's a tempo combo strategy, and it wants to rapidly close out the game as fast as possible. Yeah, you're going to draw extra cards off Coercive Portal, but it's an investment card. In Red Deck Wins at 4 mana, I want to be killing my opponent, not waiting an extra turn to draw cards. As you'll see, like it totally punishes her here because we end up repealing it, then we end up cyclonic rifting it while we're playing out much larger and better threats. So I look at it right now and I'm like, cool, dude. I just got a time walk. This card just doesn't belong in Red Deck Wins. Like I know folks talk it up, it's not that good, guys. It's fine. It's great in like a deck like Stacks. So is Staff of Nin in a deck like Stacks because that's off the top ropes or an off the top ropes deck that is very draw dependent and does not have means of card advantage to generate greater selection and decision cycle. This card though is just not. It doesn't do it here. It's not fast enough, and it's just such a negative tempo for a deck that is all about at the end of the day card disadvantage for tempo, for essentially gaining time over the opponent, casting multiple spells, etc. So we repeal it, we draw a Jace, then we get our Batter Skull, and the game's kind of over. We could leave up Psychonic Rift. I decide not to. I end up playing the Jace out, play the Batter Skull, main one, I guess for intimidation effect or something like that. I don't know. We Psych Rift that, end up impulsing, get a Condescend, figuring we can counter it if it comes back down again, even though it's not really that relevant right now. Leave up greater than 3 mana so we can flip the Beast Skull if it gets destroyed. We see a Stoke the Flames. We let that happen. Who cares? See a Goblin guy. We end up just countering this so we can filter the top draw. Not too worried about a Goblin guy, but at the same time, I'd like to keep my Jays. Put 2 lands on the bottom. At this point, draw another island. We equip up the Batter Skull on the Elemental, which makes it a 5/5 and out of range of pretty much all of his burn. +1 the Jace on nothing. Hellslender comes down, hits my Jace. Hey, cool. If she's going to spend 4 damage on my Jace, I'm fine with that. It's gone. Get a Grim Lavamancer. We FTK the Grim. Have Remand in hand at this point in time. Bang in for 5 damage. Following turn, she cast a Mogg War Marshal. We remand this. The reason being, I got it. She can recast it, but she can't activate her Mishra's Factory if she does, which would give her the ability to block lethally the Elemental token that's Batter Skulled up. But even then, like with the FTK on the ground, we know we're going to hit it for lethal. So we end up closing the game out with a win. I hope you guys enjoyed the matches. Sorry for some of the lengthy banter about Red Deck Wins and like build style. But I think it is relevant. Like I think when you start looking over like some of the cards she has in here, they're just not Red Deck Wins cards. They're like big red cards or like brutal cards or just like maybe some of them are good stuff mid range cards. And they're fine. They're fine cards. I just think when you start looking at Red Deck Wins, like it's all about gaining time over the opponent's tempo deck. So hope you enjoyed it. If you are interested in either the decks I'm playing or her deck lists for ideas, if you're new to the community, let me know in the comments. Also, if this is a format that interests you, it is 100 Card Singleton, currently unsupported on MTGO or by Wizards of the Coast. There's a small community of folks, generally good, decent folks, that play this game or this type of Magic every Saturday on MTGO. If you're interested in it, it's called the Chainsaw Massacre. You can register for it on Gatherling.com, again, Gatherling.com, and that happens at 15:30 or 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the continental United States. Generally, it's about a 10 to 12 player event. There will be an event going on the 24th this week, Christmas Eve. If you were interested, I believe it is starting 30 minutes early, so it would be 1500 or 3 o'clock p.m. For this week. And this week only. Pretty decent prize pool, good folks, and fun games. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if you do have anything further, please hit me up in the comments, and I'll be happy to share. Take care now.